For many years, I wanted to learn how to use Blender. Naturally, being a free open source solution, it's a lot more affordable and accessible than 3ds Max and what have you. At university, I learned how to use 3ds Max, and once I left university, obviously I lost all of those licenses. The trouble with Blender is its interface is, it's shaped after Satan's asshole. It's about as intuitive as an inside-out kettle with no handle or spout. So I'm going to show you 5 tips that helped me get over the hump of learning how to use Blender. Something that you'd really need to bear in mind is Blender very much requires you to use the keyboard, rather than relying on on-screen buttons and prompts and what have you. Tip number 1, left click. By default, whenever you click in Blender to select, it is on right click and not left. So just go to File, User Preferences, Input, select with left right. Set it to left, and suddenly you're not in Bizarro world, where crazy people that click with their right mouse button rather than their left exist. Tip number 2, Ctrl Alt Q. Suddenly, you've got yourself a view where you can actually lay things with precision and know exactly where stuff is in 3D space, rather than relying on a single viewport. Now don't get me wrong, the single viewport is just fine once you've got into the flow of it or you're working in certain detail, but for the most part when you're laying stuff down, when you're trying to see what's around, you need to know where your views are, so Ctrl Alt Q to get that quad view. This cube, how big is it? Who knows? I don't. Tip number 3, N. N brings up your object properties. Possibly one of the most useful bars that they've hidden away under N, because N stands for object properties. Here you can set your location, rotation, scale, dimensions. Of course, if you apply any properties here, you've got to do a Ctrl A to apply location, rotation, or scale, or all of the above, so it's available to the mesh when you go into edit mode. Speaking of which, tip number 4, tab to edit. Tab. Tab, 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 tab. Rather than using modifiers like edit poly, edit mesh, etc., tab is the button that will take you into edit mode for whichever object you have selected. At which point, along this bottom bar, you can then select your vertexes, your edges, your faces, back-facing, and snap to grid, which you should have turned on if you're making something which is non-arbitrary. At which point you can just select as normal, drag stuff out, and then suddenly you're thinking with portals. Tip 5. Whilst you're in this view, there are 3 more shortcuts you need to know, and these ones are pretty much the key ones that you'll be using at a basic level over and over again. W gets you all your subdivisions, merges, bevels, etc., which do themselves have their own keyboard shortcuts. For example, extrude is just E, bevel is B. Shortcuts that actually make sense. Ctrl E brings up your edges for marking seams and doing your UV maps and other such advanced features. And one shortcut that is both in edit mode and object mode, Spacebar. Spacebar allows you to actually find whatever it is you want. So if you want to add a cube, or you want to do your UV whatever, just type it in, and then select it from the space menu or press escape to cancel. And those really are the top 5 things that I wish I would have known coming in from 3D Studio Max into Blender. If I'd known those 5 things, it wouldn't have taken me so long and so much ball ache to actually get to use Blender. Because I've tried, many times, but the interface is just bad. Really bad. And if you're using the latest version of Blender, this is good compared to how it was a few years ago. This is still bad, but good lord. That's all from me, and that's all from the lair.